Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. I hate you. The words were not whispered. They were a jagged blade thrown across the dimly lit office, meant to draw blood. Julian slammed his hands onto the mahogany desk, scattering a stack of meticulously graded papers. You failed me? After the sleepless nights, the perfect citations, the thesis that you know is revolutionary? You failed me out of spite. Thunder rattled the stained glass windows of St. Ethelgard University, a Gothic beast of a building that seemed to feed on the misery of its students. Lightning flashed, illuminating the silhouette of the man sitting behind the desk. Professor Alastair Thorne didn't flinch. He didn't even look up from the fountain pen he was refilling with practiced, maddeningly slow precision. You failed, Thorne said, his voice a deep, velvet baritone that vibrated in Julian's chest despite his rage, because you lack discipline, Mr. Vane. Your passion is a wildfire. It burns bright, yes, but it leaves nothing but ash in its wake. My department requires architects, not arsonists. You're a tyrant, Julian spat, his chest heaving. He was soaked from the storm outside, his cheap white button-down clinging to his skin, hair plastered to his forehead. He looked like a drowned rat confronting a king. You're doing this because I corrected you in the lecture hall last week. Because a scholarship student made the great Alastair Thorne look fallible. Thorne finally looked up. His eyes were the color of steel, cold and impenetrable behind rimless spectacles. He set the pen down. The silence that stretched between them was heavy, suffocating, charged with a static electricity that had nothing to do with the storm. You believe this is about ego? Thorne stood up. He was tall, intimidatingly so, his charcoal three-piece suit tailored to perfection, emphasizing the broadness of his shoulders and the severe elegance of his posture. He walked around the desk, closing the distance between them until Julian had to crane his neck to maintain eye contact. If I wanted to destroy you, Julian, I wouldn't use a red pen. I would simply stop looking at you. Julian faltered, his breath hitching. The use of his first name was a violation of the protocol Thorne held so dear. Then let me retake it. Give me a chance to prove. I have a proposition, Thorne interrupted, his gaze dropping to Julian's trembling hands, then back to his eyes. The semester is over. The campus is emptying. But I have a restoration project at my family's estate in the Highlands. It requires manual labor, cataloging, and absolute obedience. Spend the winter break assisting me. If you survive the work, I will amend your grade. Julian narrowed his eyes. It sounded like a trap. It sounded like indentured servitude. But the alternative was losing his scholarship and returning to the gray, hopeless town he'd fought so hard to escape. Fine, Julian hissed. But don't think this makes us friends. Thorne's lip curled into a ghost of a smirk, terrifying and beautiful. I have no interest in being your friend, Mr. Vane. Be at the gates at 5 a.m. Do not be late. The drive north was a study in claustrophobia. Thorne drove a sleek, vintage black jagged car that smelled of expensive leather and rain. For 6 hours, the only sound was the hum of the engine and the rhythmic sweeping of the wipers. Julian sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the rolling gray moors, his stomach tied in knots. He stole glances at Thorne. The professor drove with an ease that was almost insulting, one hand resting casually on the gear shift. In the lecture hall, Thorne was a statue, remote, unreachable. Here, in the confines of the car, he felt dangerously real. Julian could see the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw, the way his knuckles turned white when he took a sharp turn. Stop staring, Thorne said, eyes fixed on the road. It's rude. I'm not staring, Julian lied, flushing. I'm assessing my captor. Thorne actually chuckled, a low rumble of a sound. Captor. Melodramatic. You accepted the terms. Because you cornered me. I gave you a choice. You chose ambition. You always do. They arrived at Blackwood Hall just as the sun was setting, bleeding crimson streaks across the sky. The estate was a monstrosity of Victorian Gothic architecture, all spires and gargoyles, perched on a cliff edge overlooking a churning sea. It was beautiful, desolate, and crumbling. It's a ruin, Julian breathed as they stepped out into the biting wind. It is history, Thorne corrected, popping the trunk. and it is rotting from the inside out. Much like the academic establishment you are so desperate to join. He handed Julian 2 heavy duffel bags. Your room is in the east wing. It's the only one with a functioning fireplace besides mine. The rest of the house is effectively freezing. Great, Julian muttered, hoisting the bags. The frozen castle of the Ice King. For the first week, the work was brutal. Thorn wasn't kidding about manual labor. They spent days in the Grand Library, moving hundreds of moldering books to dry storage, scrubbing centuries of grime from the intricate wood paneling, and cataloging artifacts that looked like they belonged in a museum of the occult. Thorn worked alongside him. That was the most disturbing part. Julian had expected to be the servant while Thorn sipped tea and dictated orders. Instead, Thorn stripped off his suit jacket, rolled up his pristine white sleeves, and worked until he was glistening with sweat. Seeing the professor's forearms, veined, strong, dusted with dark hair, distracted Julian more than he cared to admit. The animosity was still there, sharp and biting. They traded barbs over dusty tomes. You're holding that vase like a barbarian. Thorn snapped on the 3rd day, snatching a Ming Dynasty relic from Julian's hands. It requires finesse, not brute force. Maybe if you turned on the heating, my hands wouldn't be numb, Julian shot back, wiping dust from his face. Or do you conserve body heat by having no heart? Thorn paused, the vase hovering in his hands. He looked at Julian, really looked at him, his gaze sweeping over Julian's disheveled hair and dirt-smudged cheek. Go to the kitchen, Thorn said quietly. Make tea. Warm your hands. I'm not done with. That was an order, Julian. The shift in tone sent a shiver down Julian's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. The turning point came 10 days in. A storm had knocked out the power, plunging the manor into darkness. They were working in the main hall, trying to secure a tapestry before the damp reached it. Julian was high up on a ladder, stretching to reach a rusted hook. Careful, Thorn called out from below, holding a lantern. That ladder is older than you are. I've got it, I just need to. The rung snapped. Julian didn't have time to scream. Gravity took him, pulling him backward into the void. He braced for the shattering impact of the stone floor, squeezed his eyes shut, but the impact never came. Instead, he slammed into something solid and warm. Strong arms wrapped around him, wrenching the air from his lungs, and they went down together in a tangle of limbs. Julian gasped, opening his eyes. He was lying on top of Thorn. The lantern had rolled away, casting long, dancing shadows across the floor. Thorn groaned, his head resting against the stone, his glasses knocked askew. Professor! Julian scrambled up, panic seizing him. Alistair, are you okay? Thorn squeezed his eyes shut, his hand gripping his shoulder. Get off me, you idiot. I'm sorry, the rung, I told you it was unstable. Thorn tried to sit up and hissed in pain. Don't move, Julian commanded, his voice shaking. He grabbed the lantern and brought it close. Thorn's shoulder had taken the brunt of the fall. I need to check it. It's fine. Shut up. Julian reached out, his hands trembling, and began to undo the buttons of Thorn's shirt. Thorn went still. He didn't push Julian away. Julian peeled back the fabric. The skin was already bruising, a dark purple blossoming against the pale expanse of Thorn's shoulder. But it wasn't broken. Julian let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. His fingers lingered on Thorn's skin, feeling the heat radiating from him, the rapid beat of the pulse at the base of his throat. He looked up. Thorn was watching him. The glasses were gone, revealing eyes that were unguarded, dark, and swirling with an emotion Julian couldn't name. You're not broken, Julian whispered. Not physically, Thorn murmured. The air in the room changed. The antagonism that had fueled them for months seemed to evaporate, replaced by a thick, heavy tension. Julian became acutely aware of his position, straddling the professor's hips, his hands on his bare chest. Why do you hate me? Julian asked. The question slipped out before he could stop it. Is it because I'm poor? Because I don't have a pedigree? Thorn let out a harsh laugh. He reached up with his uninjured arm, his hand cupping the back of Julian's neck. His thumb traced the line of Julian's jaw, a touch so tender it felt like a burn. You think I hate you? Thorn's voice was a rough whisper. You foolish boy. I don't hate you. I resent you. Resent me? Why? Because you are brilliant, Thorn said, pulling Julian infinitesimally closer. Because you are alive in a way I haven't been in 20 years. And because when you look at me with those defiant eyes, I forget that I am your professor. I forget that I am 20 years your senior. I forget everything except how badly I want to break you apart and put you back together again. Julian's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. The forbidden territory. The line they were never supposed to cross. Then do it, Julian breathed. Break me. Thorne's eyes darkened. He sat up, ignoring the pain in his shoulder, and flipped their positions in one fluid motion. Suddenly, Julian was pinned against the cold stone floor, Thorne hovering over him like a dark angel. If I start, Thorne warned, his lips inches from Julian's, I will not stop. I will consume you, Julian. This isn't a grade. This isn't a game. If you let me in, you don't get to leave. I don't want to leave. Thorne kissed him. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was starvation. It was a collision of teeth and tongue, a release of months of pent-up frustration and unspoken desire. Thorne kissed him like he was drowning and Julian was air. Julian wrapped his arms around Thorne's neck, pulling him down, burying his hands in the thick, dark hair he'd wanted to touch since the first day of the semester. They moved together with a desperate urgency, shedding clothes and inhibitions in the flickering lantern light. The cold of the manor was forgotten, replaced by the searing heat of their bodies. The next morning, the storm had passed. Sunlight streamed through the high windows of the master bedroom. Julian woke up wrapped in silk sheets that smelled of sandalwood and musk. He was alone in the bed. Panic flared for a second. Had it been a mistake? Had Thorne regretted it and retreated back into his icy fortress? Julian sat up, pulling the sheet around his waist. The door opened, and Thorne walked in. He was dressed in casual clothes, a dark turtleneck and slacks, holding a tray with 2 cups of coffee and a plate of toast. He stopped when he saw Julian awake. For a moment, the old mask flickered back into place, the stern professor. But then, he softened. It was a subtle change, a relaxing of the tension around his eyes. Coffee, Thorne said, setting the tray on the bedside table. Black. 2 sugars. As you like it. Julian stared at him. You know how I take my coffee? I notice everything about you, Julian. I always have. Thorne sat on the edge of the bed. He reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair from Julian's forehead. So, Julian started, his voice rasping with sleep. Does this mean I passed the class? Thorne smirked, taking a sip of his own coffee. You still have to finish the cataloging in the library. I don't give handouts to anyone. Not even my partner. The word hung in the air, heavy with promise. Partner. Julian tested the word. Does this mean you're not going to fail me next semester? That depends. Thorne leaned in, his voice dropping to that dangerous, velvet register. If you misbehave in my lecture hall again, I might have to punish you. Though, I suspect we might both enjoy that. Julian laughed, a bright, genuine sound that seemed to chase away the last of the shadows in the room. He leaned forward and kissed Alastair Thorne, not as a student kissing a master, but as an equal claiming what was his. I think, Julian whispered against Thorne's lips, I'm going to enjoy this semester. And that is how the student tamed the master, turning the cold walls of academia into a sanctuary of fire. If you enjoyed seeing Julian melt the Ice King's heart, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, is it unethical for a teacher to fall for a student, or does true love override the rules? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt, masterpiece, best quality, high-res, 1.2. Korean manhwa style, semi-realistic, digital art, 2 men, BL, Yaoi, Man 1. Alastair Thorne, older, sharp jawline, wearing glasses, black turtleneck, slicked back dark hair, intense possessive expression, looking down. Man 2. Julian Vane, younger, messy brown hair, wearing unbuttoned white shirt, exposing collarbone, looking up with defiance and desire, flushed cheeks, intimate pose. Man 1 pinning Man 2 against a library bookshelf, old. Books in background, dust motes dancing in light, dramatic chiaroscuro lighting, emotional tension, cinematic composition, detailed eyes.